The horror. The horror. What if the most haunting line in cinematic history wasn't just a character's final breath, but a real-life omen for everyone who made the film? Today, we reveal 15 weirdest facts about Apocalypse Now, 1979, that even die-hard fans have never heard. From near-fatal stunts to studio sabotage, from Francis Ford Coppola mortgaging his home to Marlon Brando showing up unprepared and overweight, this film was less a shoot, more a survival mission. Stick around, because if you think you know Apocalypse Now, you haven't seen anything yet. The entire production was supposed to last 14 weeks. It took over 238 days and nearly destroyed Coppola. Francis Ford Coppola planned to shoot Apocalypse Now in just 14 weeks. Instead, the production ballooned into a grueling 238-day ordeal in the Philippines jungle, a logistical and psychological nightmare that pushed the director to the brink. Delays weren't minor inconveniences. They were systemic collapses. Monsoon season, which the team failed to anticipate properly, washed away sets and grounded helicopters for months. Coppola, already under crushing pressure after The Godfather's success, began calling the experience his Vietnam. He poured over $20 million of his own money into the film, mortgaging his Napa Valley vineyard and his house just to keep cameras rolling. In his production diaries, Coppola wrote, "My film is not about Vietnam. It is Vietnam." The line wasn't metaphorical. Just like the war it portrayed, the shoot spiraled out of control, consuming time, money, and sanity. What audiences saw as poetic chaos on screen was, in fact, barely controlled real-life disintegration. Martin Sheen suffered a near-fatal heart attack mid-production and kept filming. Martin Sheen didn't just play Captain Willard, he nearly died becoming him. During a brutal Philippines heatwave in 1977, Sheen collapsed on set with a massive heart attack. He was only 36. Doctors ordered weeks of rest, but the production had no backup plan, no insurance for delays, and no Willard without Sheen. So, astonishingly, he returned to work just days after the attack, still weak, still in pain. In fact, the infamous mirror-smashing scene in the hotel room, it was filmed the night before his heart attack. The raw emotion wasn't acting, it was a man unraveling. Sheen later admitted he was drinking heavily and deeply unstable during filming. The trauma bonded him with Coppola, who feared losing his lead, and possibly the entire film. Sheen's physical collapse became part of the movie's DNA, a real-life brush with death feeding the character's existential journey. What audiences saw as performance was, in truth, a desperate act of survival. Marlon Brando showed up unprepared, overweight, and without having read the book. When Marlon Brando arrived in the Philippines to play Colonel Kurtz, chaos erupted. He hadn't read Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, the novella that inspired the film. He hadn't even read the full script. Worse, he was drastically overweight, forcing Coppola to shoot him in deep shadow, from behind, or in silhouette. Brando demanded script changes on the spot and spent days improvising monologues with Coppola in his bungalow, often wrapped in a muumuu to cope with the heat. At one point, he shaved his head on camera, but Coppola hadn't planned for it, scrambling to rewrite scenes to accommodate the new look. Brando's fee, $1 million for less than a month's work, was astronomical. Yet his lack of preparation threatened to derail the entire third act. Coppola later admitted, "I was terrified. I had no idea if Brando could deliver." Miraculously, through intense collaboration and sheer improvisational genius, Brando's performance became iconic, though it was built on a foundation of near disaster. The U.S. military wouldn't loan helicopters, so Coppola had to ask a dictator. Francis Ford Coppola wanted real U.S. military helicopters for the Ride of the Valkyrie sequence, but the Pentagon refused, fearing the film was anti-war. Undeterred, Coppola turned to Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos. In a surreal deal, Marcos lent the production military Hueys on the condition they could be recalled instantly for actual combat. During filming, Marcos deployed troops to crush a communist uprising mid-scene. Helicopters vanished without warning, stranding cast and crew. Crew members were told to stay calm, while real warfare erupted nearby. The famous aerial assault wasn't just staged. It was shot under the shadow of a real authoritarian regime, using actual war machines for propaganda. Even the pilots were active-duty soldiers. This blurred line between fiction and reality became a hallmark of the film. What audiences saw as cinematic spectacle was, in part, enabled by a brutal dictatorship. Coppola later reflected, "We were making a movie about the insanity of war, while relying on a real war machine to do it." Dennis Hopper was cast because Coppola thought he was actually losing his mind. Dennis Hopper didn't audition for the photojournalist. He was discovered in the wilds of the Philippines, living like a real cult follower. Coppola had seen Hopper's erratic behavior in interviews and assumed he was genuinely unhinged. He cast him on the spot, believing Hopper's real-life chaos would bleed into the role. Hopper, recently sober after years of excess, leaned into the madness. He stayed in character off-set, wore the same clothes for weeks, and delivered improvised rants that terrified crew members. His performance, part prophet, part lunatic, was so intense that some actors refused to rehearse with him. Yet beneath the frenzy was a calculated genius. Hopper had studied philosophy, mysticism, and war photography for weeks. His ramblings about Kurtz weren't random. They were layered with real insight. Coppola later said, "I thought he was nuts, but his madness was precise." The role revived Hopper's career, proving that what looked like instability was actually a masterclass in controlled chaos. The opening scene took 56 takes and almost got Sheen arrested. The film's haunting opening, Willard in a Saigon hotel room, drunk and despairing, took an astonishing 56 takes over 2 days. Martin Sheen, emotionally raw and physically exhausted, broke down repeatedly. During one take, he punched the mirror so hard his hand bled, then kept performing. But the real crisis came after filming. Philippine police nearly arrested Sheen for disturbing the peace after neighbors complained about the noise and destruction. The hotel scene's authenticity wasn't just artistic, it was legally dangerous. Smoke filled the hallway, alcohol bottles littered the floor, and crew members feared Sheen might truly collapse. Coppola, watching dailies in tears, saw something transcendent. A man embodying the void of war. The scene's power comes from its truth. Sheen wasn't pretending to be broken. He was broken, and that vulnerability became the emotional core of the entire film. What audiences interpret as performance was, in fact, a man on the edge captured in real time. The entire third act was rewritten in the jungle with no ending. When production began, Apocalypse Now had no ending. Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness concluded with Kurtz's death, but Coppola wasn't sure how to adapt it. For months, the script ended ambiguously. Then, during a feverish night in the Philippines, Coppola, Sheen, and Brando brainstormed a new finale. Willard kills Kurtz as a ritual sacrifice, then leaves as the tribe bows not to him, but to the boat. It was mythic, primal, and utterly unplanned. Brando improvised much of his final monologue, drawing on his own readings of philosophy and history. The crew didn't know the ending until days before shooting it. Even the sacrificial bull slaughter was a last-minute addition, real, unsimulated, and deeply unsettling. Coppola later called it filmmaking by divination. What audiences experience as a coherent climax was, in reality, stitched together in desperation. The lack of a script didn't weaken the film, it gave it its eerie, dreamlike power. Local tribes were hired as extras, then demanded payment in guns. Coppola hired hundreds of indigenous Ifugao people to play Kurtz's followers, but negotiations took a dangerous turn when tribal leaders refused cash, demanding firearms instead. The production team panicked. Giving weapons to local groups in a politically unstable region could spark violence or worse, attract government retaliation. After tense discussions, the crew compromised. They paid in tools, clothing, and food, and staged the weapon scenes with prop guns under tight supervision. Still, tensions flared. Some tribe members believed Kurtz was a real god and that Brando held spiritual power. Others grew frustrated with long hours and broken promises. Yet their presence lent the finale an undeniable authenticity. Their chants, rituals, and silent stares weren't performed, they were real cultural expressions. Coppola later expressed regret over the ethical ambiguity, admitting, "We used their reality to sell our fiction." The line between exploitation and collaboration remains one of the film's darkest legacies. The sound design team recorded real combat to heighten realism. To capture the oral terror of war, sound designer Walter Murch and his team didn't rely on stock effects, they recorded real combat. During post-production, they traveled to military bases and even listened to classified battlefield tapes. For the helicopter attack, they layered actual rotor sounds from Hueys, then added screams, radio chatter, and explosions recorded during live fire exercises. Murch even mixed in the sound of buffalo being slaughtered for the Kurtz compound scenes, creating a subconscious link between war and ritual sacrifice. The result was a soundscape so immersive, veterans reported PTSD triggers upon hearing it. Murch later said, "We weren't making noise. We were reconstructing trauma. Every gunshot, every distant wail, every rustle in the jungle was engineered to unsettle." What audiences hear as atmosphere is, in fact, a meticulously crafted echo of real violence blurring the line between cinema and memory. Coppola fired his original cinematographer mid-shoot over creative differences. Coppola began Apocalypse Now with cinematographer Vittorio Storaro, but tensions exploded early. Storaro wanted lyrical, painterly light. Coppola demanded raw, documentary-style realism. After weeks of clashing visions, Coppola fired Storaro, only to rehire him days later when no replacement could handle the jungle conditions. The compromise reshaped the film. Storaro used natural light, smoke and shadow to create a hallucinatory look, turning limitations into art. The famous orange-hued napalm explosion at dawn, achieved with no artificial lighting, just timing and luck. Storaro later called the shoot a battle for the soul of the image. Their friction birthed a visual language unlike anything before, part nightmare, part poem. Go ahead and like and subscribe, because without this clash of titans, Apocalypse Now might have looked like just another war movie. Instead, it became a visual scripture of madness. A typhoon destroyed the primary set, forcing a 6-week shutdown. Just weeks into principal photography, Typhoon Olga roared through the Philippines with devastating force, obliterating the meticulously constructed $2 million riverside village that served as the film's primary set. Tents, camera equipment, lighting rigs, and even backup generators were swept away in torrential floodwaters. The storm didn't merely delay production, it brought it to a grinding halt for 6 agonizing weeks. Insurance policies, riddled with act of God exclusions, offered no financial relief, forcing Francis Ford Coppola to liquidate more of his personal assets to keep the project alive. Morale plummeted. Crew members abandoned the shoot daily, convinced the film was cursed. Yet from the wreckage emerged something unexpected. The rebuilt sets bore the scars of real destruction, warped wood, mud-caked walls, and an eerie decay that no art department could fake. Coppola, ever the alchemist of chaos, declared, "The storm is part of the story now." The oppressive atmosphere and scenes shot afterward wasn't manufactured, it was inherited. What audiences interpret as deliberate visual poetry was in truth authentic ruin. The typhoon didn't derail Apocalypse Now, it deepened its soul. Laurence Fishburne was only 14 and lied about his age to get cast. Laurence Fishburne was just 14 years old when he boarded a plane to the Philippines to play Tyrone Mr. Clean Miller, a teenage machine gunner aboard the PBR patrol boat. To secure the role, he boldly lied about his age, claiming to be 17. Director Francis Ford Coppola, impressed by his Broadway experience in Two Gentlemen of Verona, had no reason to doubt him until weeks into filming, when Fishburne's actual age surfaced. Rather than recast, Coppola made the controversial decision to keep him, believing Fishburne's raw youth would lend authenticity to the character's tragic arc. But the jungle set was no place for a child. Fishburne later described the experience as overwhelming. Surrounded by seasoned actors, exposed to graphic violence, psychological intensity, and the film's haunting themes of moral decay. Despite the toll, his performance remains one of the film's most poignant elements, a beacon of innocence swallowed by war's machinery. His journey from eager rookie to silent casualty mirrors America's own disillusionment in Vietnam. What looks like a soldier's coming of age was, in reality, a boy's premature collision with the adult world. The gamble worked, but the cost was deeply personal. The film's final shot, a boat disappearing into fog, was an accident. The haunting final image of Apocalypse Now, Captain Willard's patrol boat receding into thick, spectral fog, as the end, by the Doors echoes, was never scripted or storyboarded. On the last scheduled day of shooting, an unexpected bank of mist rolled in off the river, shrouding the set in an otherworldly haze. Most directors would have called it a wrap and rescheduled, not Coppola. Sensing something transcendent, he shouted, "Roll camera," and captured the shot in a single, unrepeatable take. The resulting image, ambiguous, melancholic, and mythic, perfectly encapsulated the film's central theme. War offers no resolution, only disappearance. In post-production, editors initially cut the foggy finale, favoring a cleaner, more conventional ending. But legendary sound designer and editor Walter Murch passionately advocated for its restoration, arguing it was the only conclusion that honored the film's philosophical weight. Coppola agreed. That accidental fog, born of weather and instinct, became one of cinema's most iconic and enigmatic final shots. What viewers assume is carefully crafted symbolism was, in fact, a fleeting gift from nature, a moment of serendipitous grace in a production defined by turmoil and control lost. Studio executives tried to cancel the film, calling it unreleasable. As Apocalypse Now's budget spiraled past $30 million, making it the most expensive film ever made. At the time, panic erupted at United Artists. Studio executives, already nervous about Coppola's open-ended approach, dispatched emissaries to the Philippines to assess the damage. After screening disjointed, non-linear dailies, some featuring Brando in shadow, others with unfinished action, they declared the film unreleasable and threatened immediate cancellation. They gave Coppola an ultimatum: deliver a rough cut within 48 hours, or lose funding entirely. Exhausted but defiant, Coppola complied, assembling a 3-hour, incoherent assembly that barely held together. Miraculously, the executives sensed a glimmer of genius beneath the chaos and granted him more time, though they insisted on a happy ending. Coppola refused, standing firm on his bleak, ambiguous vision. His gamble paid off spectacularly. The film premiered at Cannes in 1979 and won the Palme d'Or, shared with The Tin Drum, silencing doubters and redefining cinematic ambition. What the studio saw as incoherent madness, audiences and critics recognized as visionary art. Without Coppola's unwavering resolve, Apocalypse Now might have vanished into development hell, another ghost of Hollywood overreach. The Ride of the Valkyries, scene required. Over 200 soldiers and real napalm. The legendary Ride of the Valkyries helicopter assault wasn't just iconic, it was a staggering logistical and financial feat. To stage the sequence, Coppola coordinated with the Philippine military to deploy over 200 real soldiers as extras, flying in authentic U.S.-style Huey helicopters, borrowed from Ferdinand Marcos's regime. Real napalm, carefully controlled but undeniably dangerous, was dropped on carefully selected palm groves to create the film's unforgettable fireballs. To simulate the grisly scent of burning flesh, the crew roasted pork off camera, wafting the smell into scenes for visceral realism. Pilots executed perilous low-altitude maneuvers, some without safety harnesses, pushing both machines and men to their limits. At one point, a helicopter nearly crashed into the river during a take. Shooting stretched over weeks, often halted by weather or mechanical failure, with Coppola waiting hours for the perfect morning light. Nearby villagers, hearing Wagner and seeing explosions, genuinely feared a U.S. invasion had begun. The sequence alone cost over $2 million, nearly 10% of the original budget. What audiences experience as thrilling, operatic warfare was, in truth, a high-stakes ballet of fire, steel, and human endurance. It remains one of the most expensive and ambitious single scenes ever filmed. Apocalypse Now was never just a movie. It was a fever dream carved into celluloid, a production that consumed its creators and birthed a legend. Its legacy isn't just in film schools or war documentaries. It's in every director who dares to chase a vision into the unknown. If you've made it this far, you're ready for the truth behind the horror. Hit like, subscribe, and sound off in the comments. Which fact shocked you most? Because in the end, the madness wasn't just on screen, it was everywhere.